Hello! You just heard two sounds that I designed from scratch for the Waldorf Iridium and the Korg Wavestate. In this video I want to recreate both sounds and talk a little bit about the techniques that I use when I create pads or atmospheric sounds for ambient music. You don't necessarily need to have an Iridium or a Wavestate, because I believe that a lot of things that I talk about can be recreated using other synthesizers or software. So I hope you enjoy this video and learn something from it. The first sound is from the Waldorf Iridium and sounds like this. I've added a lot of reverb coming from the free plugin called Supermassive from Valhalla DSP, and without the reverb it sounds like this. In this sound I'm using two different engines. The first one is a granular sampling engine located in oscillator 1, and the second sound is something like a unison super saw sound located in oscillator 2. I will first recreate the granular sampling sound on an empty layer so that you can follow what I'm doing. So first thing is that I activate this particle engine, and of course I have to load a sample, and the sample that I added is a percussion sample. So in the library there are different kinds of samples, and there are some samples from, I think, Richard Devine, RD, and there is a percussive sample which usually sounds like this. No, that's the wrong one. So this is the sample I'm using. And after I added it to the engine, I can play it on the keys or use these ones. The first thing I have to do is switch from the regular sample engine, which just plays back the sample, to the granular engine. So after this warning message, I can go to the granular mode. And then it sounds like this. So the idea of granular sampling is that I can pick any small part of the sample and play it back continuously. And I could also move through the sample and play different parts. And the first thing that I want to do in my patch is to thin out the number of playbacks. And I can do this by getting to the maximum value on the length setting. And then I also shorten the individual grains. And I also go down to only 3 grains from 4. It's not much, but it does a little difference. Then, to get this kind of plucky vibe, I am shaping the envelope of the sample. So that's a very nice graphical representation, which makes it very clear what this parameter does. And now I have a very plucky sound. To add more variation to it, I use different jitter settings. Jitter just is some kind of randomization. So when I move this to a higher setting, you also see on the display what it does. I don't have to explain it to you. So now it's not playing with the same rhythm all the time, but there is a variation on the time basis. I can do the same thing with the position. Unfortunately, this is not represented on the display, but it means that this starting position here changes to different value all the time with every grain that is triggered. In the next step, I go to the third page of the granular engine, which is the grain pitch section. And first I have to set the pitch mode to random, and then I crank up this pitch spread value, and now I have a very nice randomization of the pitch. In the next step, I'm using one of the 6 envelopes to control the volume of my sound. So the first thing that I do is that I tune down the oscillator volume to 0 so that there is no sound coming when I press a key. Then I go to the mod matrix, and there I assign, which one is it? Free envelope 2 as a source, and I route it to oscillator 3 mix. And now this envelope is controlling the volume of my percussive sound. With this setting, I just hear the sound at the very beginning of every note, and it's not constantly playing. I believe that this sound is very nice, but if it was playing all the time, it would go on your nerves. And if I want to use it in an ambient track for 10 minutes or 20 minutes, then I don't want this constant sparkling in my sound. So this is the reason why I use the envelope to set it to this value. For the second layer, I'm using the waveform module of the Iridium, which is basically a standard subtractive synth, which gives you different waveforms. I'm using the sawtooth, and without any further tweaking, it would sound like this. I pitched it down 2 octaves from 0 to -24 semitones. And then I used the unison feature. and set it to the maximum value of 8. The detune setting is very important. I just set it to a value that I like. What I like about the Iridium is that the unison count does not affect the polyphony of the patch. So I have still the full 16 voices with the unison mode. So then the filter comes into play, and this is a standard 24 dB low pass filter, which you find, no, it's 12 dB actually. Okay, so I set this to a 12 dB low pass filter, and I want some movement of this filter so that it would sound like this. A little swell, like an opening and closing of the filter. And I believe for this I used the free envelope 1. No. I used the actual filter envelope for it. Yeah, why not? So this is the filter envelope, and with a little envelope amount it sounds like this. There's also a nice graphical representation here, which shows the automatic opening and closing of the filter. Then again, I set the volume to 0 so that there is no sound coming when I press a key. But then I used a different of the free envelopes, I think free envelope 1, which looks like this, with a slow attack, and then nothing happens for a long time, and then there's a long release. And when I apply this envelope to the volume of oscillator 2, which is my unison oscillator, then it sounds like this. I now activate the first sound that I showed you, and both together sound like this. And again with the supermassive reverb added. This is a patch that I programmed on the Korg Wavestate, which I got last week. And this patch also has a lot of delay and reverb, of course, added to it. And the dry sound is like this. The Wavestation has 4 different layers, which are basically 4 completely independent sounds. Unlike the Iridium, where all the oscillators and engines go into the same filter, you have a different filter setting for each of the 4 layers. So they are called, I think, programs on the Wavestate. 2 of them are like usual pad sounds, which sounds like this. And the other 2 layers, B and C, are playing these kind of percussive noises. First, I want to explain the 2 pad sound layers. The Korg Wavestate uses a technique that is called wave sequencing, which means that you can load different samples to different steps. And just like a step sequencer, on each step a different sample would be played back. The pitch can also be adjusted on each of the steps and different other settings, but the most interesting thing is to use different samples on each steps. Because this is an ambient patch, I set the timing value to very slow timing levels. And if I press a key, you will see that the wavestate switches between the two samples that I selected. In the first slot, I used a choir sample that is, I believe, from the classic library of the old Korg synthesizers. And then on the second slot, there is a sample which is, I think, coming from a string ensemble. Yeah, and then of course I closed the filter to give it a more darker vibe. And I also added a little bit of pitch LFO. But just a little bit. And then of course I set the envelopes to very slow attack and very long release. On layer D, I have a different sample loaded. In this case, it's a pulse width modulation string sound. And I think the index WS tells us that this is a sample that was also included in the original wave station. It sounds like this. First thing to do is, of course, shape the envelopes to very slow settings. And for this sound, I used a bandpass filter. Also with a high resonance setting. There's one very important thing that I changed on layer D, and this is the pitch of the sound. So this is layer A, and this is layer D. So I'm pressing the note D, but it is effectively playing note A. And this is because I set the pitch to +7 semitones. So this would be the original pitch. And with semitones +7, it effectively plays the note A. When I activate layer A and D, both at the same time, with different pitch settings, like I explained, I get some very interesting chords. So let's go to layer B and C, which play these percussive sounds. First, on layer B, I have picked a sample that is called coin thwack, and usually it sounds like this. And when I have a very long attack envelope, then this very loud noise at the beginning is filtered out and you only have this looped tail of the sample. So this is, I think, everything I did to this sound. On layer C, it's getting a bit more complicated. I will first speed it up. So what's happening here is that I was using different samples. So this is the first sample, the second sample. Wait. So there are 3 different samples which all play some bell-like sounds. And then there is something that is called shape automation. And so I can set it to like a very plucky envelope. Which makes it sound like this. And then I have this timing lane, and the timing lane is something very important on the Wavestate. You can see that there's a different duration for each step. And there's also a randomization set to the probability factor, which means that sometimes the steps are not played. So it jumps from step 1 to 3 and is not playing step 2. And since this is different with every note that I press, the sound gets like, yeah, more random. So, yeah, you see what it's doing. And then I use different pitch values on another automation lane, which means that the first step is on 0 semitones, the next one on -12, -24, and again 0. And since I have only 3 steps in the timing lane, but 4 in the pitch lane, there is like a rhythmical permutation going on all the time. Of course, this can also be done on every other synthesizer. So if you have a synthesizer with different step sequences and you set them to different parameters and they are working on different length, then you also can achieve this rhythmical variation in any other patch. Then at the last step, I go to a very slow speed so that these percussive elements are not playing all the time and getting on your nerves, but instead just gets played and at a very slow rate. Like this. So then everything together sounds like this. And then I added some delay from the UHE color copy to accentuate these rhythmic sparkles a little bit. And then again the Valhalla Supermassive.